And welcome into this week's edition of The Locker Room. I'm your host, Cade Crenshaw, joined this week by Wade Rainey as we're talking college football, almost at the midpoint of the season for ACC and SEC schools, with the Big Ten coming up just this weekend. Now, Wade, what an exciting season it's been so far. Let's talk about this Heisman race. Trevor Lawrence, the current front runner. Is there anybody that can catch him?
As we've seen in the past, it's not often that you see a Heisman favorite through the first few weeks of the season win the Heisman. Guys like Leonard Fournette, they've been dominant through the first half of the season and they end up not winning the trophy. But as of right now, with how dominant Clemson has been, just showed their class with a huge victory over Miami. Trevor Lawrence continues to dominate. Maybe once the Big Ten gets started up, we'll see something change. But right now, I do not see anyone catching Trevor Lawrence in the Heisman race.
You mentioned the Heisman history there, and since 2011, the Heisman frontrunner going into Week 8, only one has brought home the trophy, and that was in 2016 with Lamar Jackson. But you look at those other names: Saquon Barkley, Tua, Leonard Fournette, even Andrew Luck back in 2011. The list goes on and on of these top-notch players being the odds-on favorite but not bringing it home. Lawrence, over 1,500 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, and 1 interception on the year. If you take Lawrence out of the equation right now, who do you think's in second place?
I absolutely love Mac Jones for Alabama. I know the QB position was a bit of a question mark coming in for them, obviously. When you lose Tua Tagovailoa, that is always going to be a question mark for any team. But as we've seen, this is what Alabama does. They reload, and they've reloaded with a super talented quarterback in Mac Jones, who's impressed me greatly. Came up with a huge game against Georgia in what was definitely the game of the week in college football, and really just dominated that vaunted Georgia defense, which we hadn't seen any player do so far this year.
You mentioned Mac Jones, who's really quietly having a good year for Alabama in the post-Tua era. Over 1,500 yards passing and with 12 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Mac Jones quietly working his way as a dark horse into this Heisman Trophy conversation. Now, obviously, we're so far into the season now, we can look back on preseason expectations and think we really expected a lot out of this team, but we haven't really gotten the results. Looking back so far, what team has disappointed you the most this season in college football?
I feel like people say this every year. I'm going to have to go with Texas. Came in with a veteran quarterback in Sam Ehlinger, and once again, high expectations in Austin, and they just have not delivered. Another loss to Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry, an Oklahoma team that has not been great this year, and I think once again we'll have to be waiting a few more months to be able to truly say Texas is back.
It's definitely a while before we can say the Longhorns are back, but you talk about the Sooners there. That's that team for me is the team that disappointed the most. They're 2-2 on the season, but really it has been a great 2-2. They have losses to Kansas State and Iowa State, and their 2 wins being one over Texas, the other over Missouri State. Really not a great year for the Sooners so far. Not to mention they're averaging 91 penalty yards per game. Absolutely atrocious discipline on this team. Not to mention Spencer Rattler, who we had a lot of expectations coming in just his freshman season. He's done decently passing through the air with 13 touchdowns, but he also has 5 interceptions, and he's been sacked 10 times. So the Oklahoma offensive line and overall the team discipline, I think, hurts them the most so far.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the growing pains with a young quarterback. You're going to get turnovers. Obviously, Rattler is tremendously talented, but one thing they can control is all those penalty yards that they're giving up. Oklahoma needs to be more disciplined. They need to clean it up in Norman, and I just really want to see this team turn around because coming into the season, we had expectations for them to be a college football playoff contender out of the Big 12.
2-2 on the season are the Sooners. First time losing back-to-back regular season games for Oklahoma since the late 1990s. So it's been a while that Oklahoma has been this bad in Norman. I think it's safe to say that the best team in the Big 12 is Oklahoma State. They're ranked 6th in the country right now. Mike Gundy really has that squad headed in the right direction.
Yeah, that has been one of my biggest surprises this year as well, so how well Oklahoma State has been playing. You had the whole controversy in the offseason on whether Chuba Hubbard was going to even play this season. But he has, and he's been phenomenal. He's a Heisman contender in and of himself. And the Cowboys have been on fire so far. And if they can keep this up, I wouldn't be surprised if they are able to grab a college football playoff spot.
Now, we talk about teams that have disappointed us so far in Oklahoma and Texas. Now, let's look at the teams that have impressed us. Looking at the grand scheme of college football, what teams stuck out to you?
I mentioned Oklahoma State, but one other squad I've been really impressed with has been North Carolina. I know they just came up with a loss to Florida State, which was a pretty big upset. They dropped in the rankings, but so far, Mac Brown has them rolling. Sam Howell, a Heisman contender at quarterback, only a true sophomore, and North Carolina has looked really, really good. Obviously, a true test will come when they play Clemson, but as for right now, they're my most pleasant surprise in the country.
You know, it's interesting for me to say that Alabama has been the most surprising team for me because there were a lot of question marks surrounding this Alabama team. How's their defense going to play in a year that we really haven't had that vaulted Alabama defense from years past? And offensively, well, there's no more to us. So we're going to have those mediocre quarterbacks come through Alabama like we've had in the last few years in Tuscaloosa. But Mac Jones had an absolutely incredible year. And he's made himself a Heisman candidate. Not to mention that big win over the Georgia Bulldogs. Over 400 yards passing and 4 touchdowns for Jones against what was a very, very, very highly regarded Georgia defense. They absolutely tore them apart, not to mention the whole offensive firepower with the Crimson Tide this season. Najee Harris, 152 yards on 31 carries against the Dogs. Not to mention the receiving side of things. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith combined 328 yards against the Dogs. This Alabama Crimson Tide offense, it is a true threat to college football.
Oh, absolutely. With guys like Devonta Smith, Najee Harris, as you mentioned Najee Harris, for my money, he's the best running back in college football, and he's been showing it so far this year. He came back to school for another year, and he's been proving why he should merit a first-round draft pick. He's been phenomenal. But yeah, this Alabama offense, there was some worry that they would lose some of the vertical pop that they had with Tua at quarterback, obviously with his arm strength, his ability to get the ball down the field. But Mac Jones has stepped right in, and they've barely skipped a beat. So they have been surprising, and once again, they're going to challenge for a national title.
Heading into week 9 of the college football season, week 1 for the Big Ten. Right now, who do you hand the Heisman Trophy to, and also who do you think we'll see in the national championship game?
Right now, I still think it's Trevor Lawrence. It has to be Trevor Lawrence. He's been so good. He's been the favorite from the beginning of this year, and he hasn't showed any signs of slowing down. As for who's in the national championship game, it's tough without seeing any of the Big Ten play, but on paper, I love this Ohio State team. Got a great receiving core, led by Garrett Wilson, true sophomore. Justin Fields returns at quarterback. You have Master Teague at running back, and then obviously that defense is always, always so good. And so I think that they could challenge. Obviously, it's hard to say right now. We don't know how they look. But with the Big Ten playing this week, we'll soon get a pretty good idea of who the true title contenders will be. As of right now, it's got to be Clemson and Alabama again.
I think I agree with you there. Clemson, Alabama in the national championship game, and I think we're going to see Trevor Lawrence finally bring home the Heisman Trophy for the first time ever in Clemson history, as Deshaun Watson missed out on it back in 2015 and 16. Trevor Lawrence, he hasn't gotten it the last 2 years. Now a junior, he said he's already going to the NFL next year. This will be his last chance to maybe bring home that Heisman Trophy to Dabo Swinney and the Tigers. It's an exciting season winding down here for a few teams and also getting started for teams in the Big Ten. Wade, thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you all for tuning in as well. You've been watching The Locker Room. For Wade Rainey, I'm Cade Crenshaw. We'll see you next week.